Hey friends, this one device just blew my mind and it's been hiding in Ableton since version 11. Meet Vector Map, Dillon Bastian's genius creation that turns particles into modulation, quite unlike any you may already be familiar with. Feeling a little bored with LFOs? This thing uses organic particle physics to control any parameter in ways that will blow your mind. If you're an Ableton suite owner and you're not using this yet, you're seriously missing out. Today, I'm showing you exactly why Vector Map just became my go-to device for making fresh and unique sounds. Trust me, after this tutorial, you'll feel inspired to dive deeper into organic modulation. So without further ado, let's jump into today's video. We're going to be working in Ableton Live 12, and Suite is important in the sense of having access to the pack that is free if you're a Suite owner to download. Links will be down in the description of the video, and also if you want to go to Dillon Bastian's channel and support him and buy some of his other devices, I'll link it all below in the description. So what have we got here for context? We've got just a simple track over here with a 4 on the floor kick drum. Just for a little bit of context in a moment, nothing fancy that we need to worry about there. Track number 2 over here has a little pattern in it, and we're going to be using that as like a little drum percussion track. And on there is a drum rack called Circle of Truth. It's an Ableton Live preset, so if you like the sounds that I'm using within it, then you can grab that over in the browser of Ableton Live. And then track 3 here at the moment just contains a default initialized wavetable along with an SQ sequencer and then the vector map itself. So a very quick one, how this love affair with the vector map began for me. I simply was looking one day for an XY controller, something that I could map axis X and axis Y to different macros or different parameters, and we have some of those devices inside of Max for Live, very simple XY controllers, and they're worth looking at in their own right for mapping things to X and Y axes. But I also discovered while I was on the hunt for that the vector map and just realized, oh my gosh, why wasn't I using this earlier? And the fact that it does XY plus 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 plus. Right, so more on that in a second as we get stuck into using it. Let's have a quick listen to what we've got, and then let's start getting a sound rolling here. So nice and simple. As usual, I'm going to try and give you 2 different examples of how you might use vector map, but also bearing in mind that in a 15 to 25 minute video, I'm just scraping the surface. So I'm just going to give you a window into possibilities and how the basics work, and then you can take this and run with it. So on this wavetable track is where we're going to start making our first sort of sounds here using the vector map. And I think I'm going to go for a sort of trance type lead or melodic techno type lead, and I'm going to do that using this fantastic SQ sequencer, which by the way, if you're not familiar with that, you should also check out the packs, the sequencer pack that I believe arrived when Ableton Live 12 became a thing. Again, there's an amazing little group of sequencers in there, including this one, which would be one of my favorite go-to sequencers. So we're going to set that up to play the wavetable, and then we're going to start adding the vector map in and doing some modulation. So let's get started. Let's also make our synth like a trancey sawtooth combination, 2 oscillators. Let's detune these apart. And we're okay so far. Quite like this. Okay, let's change our key maybe. Put it into scale. There we go. Let's also adjust, apart from pitch, also velocity of each step. And also the note length of it. Okay, let's also try maybe the sequence running instead of forwards, backwards, or different. Maybe we'll keep it forward just so it's not too chaotic, but the random was interesting. And then maybe just for a nice little bit of spice, we'll just go to the velocity lane here and we'll change how many steps and also maybe its direction. So something a little bit different there as well. So that'll do for the sequencer. Now let's sort of tweak our wavetable slightly. What if we pitch it? Okay, let's also turn on one of the filter types, have a little bit of drive. Maybe also a bit of shimmer. Okay, sounding good. Right, so we've got a basic, nice kind of sequenced wavetable synth. Let's turn on vector map and now let's walk through kind of the basic controls and what it's going to do for us. So the first thing we see is this kind of circular, well, I'd say sort of map of some sorts. And we've got this kind of particle that's floating around in that window. Let's call it particle for today. It's also up the top here, we sort of see voices. So the one voice is matching one particle, let's say. Then as we sort of work our way down here, quite simply, we've got the option that when we map this to have remote or mod, which means that much like all of Ableton Live these days, when you're mapping, you kind of can take fully over the parameter you map this, in this case, the vector map to, or you can have it so that it modulates that parameter and you can still move that parameter. We'll see that in action shortly. And then we've got scale, which quite simply spreads this particle further apart. So it's going to travel much further and modulate a bigger distance. So if we bring the scale down like this, you'll see it's stuck in the center of that circle. And if we move it this way, we start really spreading it further and further apart. So that's very interesting in itself. And then speed, pretty straightforward as well. If we bring it around to the left, we slow things right down. And if we speed it up, we speed things up. Amazing stuff. So then after that, we've got these three tabs down on the right hand side here, and they're kind of critical to setting up the vector map. The top one here is again looking like much like most of Ableton Live's modulation interfaces, the LFOs or envelope followers. We've got all of the, mapping, where we can click and map our particle to, and then right next door we've got a range that we can constrain that mapping to, and then we've got, importantly here in this column, the number matching the particle. So as you can see, you could actually change this if there were more particles to a different number. Fantastic stuff. Right now, the first two would be mapping to particle 1. Now, remembering back to what I said a little earlier, that I was looking for an XY controller, and I ended up in the hands of Vector Map after playing with the basic ones that come in Max for Live. And when we get to the furthest right column and we open up this arrow here, the very top one is showing you that whatever we're mapping to that is the X-axis, and whatever below it is mapping to the Y-axis. So that's it being used as a very basic XY, well, it's not basic, but as an XY controller, modulating those two axes of really whatever you want to map. Amazing stuff. And then we've got three other options which get really interesting, and I've written them down over here in the order of what they do. So the top one below the Y-axis is mapped to the magnitude or the distance from the center of this. The second from the bottom is mapped to the velocity's current speed. We'll see that in a moment, what that is all about. And then also the size, mass, static variation, which is the bottom one down here. So like I said, this is an absolute beast, has lots of depth to it. You're not going to get bored in a hurry. And what I'll show you today, you can expand and run with it and go further and further. So the second tab we need to pay attention to then is a bit related to what I was just speaking about. If we open this up, we see some more options here. We see velocity, magnetism, remembering that this is like organic modulation of particles that either play off each other, the different particles, or play off an attractor like we can see in the middle here. So we can mess around with velocity, the strength around the attractor, plus or minus or equal again. Does it attract to the other particle? Does it sort of, spread itself further away? Amazing stuff. And we've also got this crazy kind of flow field over here where you can turn this into like a snake as well. So like I said, there is, really an incredible amount of depth here. So let's get mapping, shall we? So let's get back over here and let's map some wavetable stuff to get our sequencer a bit more interesting. Let's map, for starters, our filter frequency cutoff, so we can start seeing that's moving to particle 1. And let's also maybe either do fold, or let's try fold first and then maybe FM. And let's make this range a lot smaller. We might do warping as well in a second. That's kind of interesting, just like that. And let's bring in again our filter a little bit. So remembering I mentioned a moment ago about the speed and the scale, so if I play with that now, you'll see that all the modulation slows down, right? So if you want it very subtle, you bring your scale down. Sorry, that doesn't slow down, it's shortening the range of where that particle moves from, whereas if you're going this way, the range is a lot larger, as you can see. And if I do the speed again, slowing that modulation down, really nice. So it can be very subtle. Okay, so let's now look at bringing a second voice in, and we'll map that to something else just to expand on this a little bit. Like I said, we're going to keep it fairly simple, but we're going to now bring in a second particle and a second voice. And with that second voice, as you can see, you could still be mapping things to 1 or 2. So now we've got 2, the voice 2 here. So again, I'm going to keep it simple. We've got 2 mapping possibilities. So let's say we pop in the matrix here. Let's maybe make time 100. And then let's map particle 2 to that. And let's have a listen to that. Nice. So now you can hear beautiful movement that starts to happen here. And if I, again, just kind of like change from remote to mod, then I can come back and remember I can change my, filter cutoff position and it modulates around that. So, great that we have that choice as well. So you could work with, modulating and still the parameter isn't completely taken over, or you can be in remote mode and let it take completely over that parameter. Okay, so let's spice this up even further. Really happy with that. In a second, we're going to just have a little bit of a mess around in here as well. But let's say that, let's use our creative caps again with a little bit of further depth. This is the one thing I'm going to show you sort of above and beyond just the vector map. It occurred to me that one of my favorite things to do is modulate the modulator. So this is a modulator. And what I mean is we could add more vector maps and map vector maps to vector maps. And it can start to get, again, really quite deep in terms of what you're doing here. And you might think, why is that all worth it? And it's just creating chaos. Well, again, if you're interested in sound design or pushing and trying to find new sounds and unique combinations of things, trust me, this is a pathway that will help you achieve that. So what my brain thought to do is grab an LFO from Ableton Live. So instead of a vector map with a vector map, I'm going to map an LFO here to the speed of the vector map. So we're going to bring this LFO in and we're going to map it to the speed. So I'm going to modulate that. And then I'm going to change my waveform in the LFO to maybe something like glider. And then maybe let's make it note synced. And then again, because I'm in modulation mode, I can play around with this still, right? And change where we start from. There we go. So now we again have something really quite interesting, right? Let's give our trance lead a bit of reverb and a bit of delay. And now let's just tweak our sound a little bit. So I'm going to map the particle 2 also to the warp over here. More movement. Just trimming the range a little bit. Okay, so now let's get into this second page and just have a little play around here with the velocity and the strength on top of what we've already got, right? So I'm quite happy with how it sounds, but let's just see what happens in here. Right, things are starting to get pretty wild, but kind of cool. So like I said, just scraping the surface, right? Look at all this depth that I can continue to play around with. You know, it's really powerful for kind of coming up with your own sounds. So maybe you can now appreciate where my love affair with this device has started. So we've kind of pushed it a little bit further in the sense of using an LFO to, you know, modulate the modulator. Like I said, you could have several vector maps. You can use LFOs. So I'm kind of happy with the wavetable. Let's now give you a second example before we sign off on today's video. And that's going to be just to show you this drum rack now. So another thought that came to mind is like I mapped this, you know, initialized wavetable, and I've just been going around mapping different parameters on the synth. Well, another thing that occurred to me, if you're working with presets or you're often putting things into instrument racks and adding macros and doing all that good things, so you're mapping lots of things to your own macros, then all of the macros on something like this drum rack can obviously be mapped and modulated by the vector map, and again that can give us all sorts of interesting combinations and possibilities. So let's mess around with this little pattern here on this drum rack track and just see if we can get that kind of a little bit interesting with the vector map. So similarly, we're going to turn it on and I'm going to go straight into here, and I'm going to look at the targets that are already on this preset Circle of Truth kit, and I can see filter cutoff, transposition, reverb, delay. Delay would be really interesting. So let's map that. Let's maybe turn off our lead so we can kind of hear for a second. So we can see it's modulating that. Nice. So now we've got that little bit of delay there. I just realized I was moving the wrong one, sorry. So I wanted to kind of change the range of the filter envelope a little bit. Better. So I didn't want it to close completely off. Nice. Okay, so let's say we change the speed of this a bit. Okay, let's again get a particle 2 in play. Let's map that to impact. And also the cutoff. So you can hear the wavetable is going pretty, wild because it's got a lot of depth to it. So this is kind of sounding nice. So again, if I just take it out, what occurred to me, you can see all the movement that we've got here, which I think is great. But now what we can do is also, if you've kind of like, as I said, I'm just giving you a window and hopefully inspiring you, you could now, if you've set up snapshots like this rack has, start keeping all the mapping and vector map modulation, but start going through here. Nice. For example, and changing the layer of the kit. So yeah, it occurred to me here that snapshots and creating your own and flipping this can also just take this further and further. So again, I'm just going through the snapshots here that were already coming with this particular drum rack, but I could also start randomizing these macros and they're all mapped to the vector map. So we're getting, all sorts of kind of interesting things happening here. Good things. There you go. Nice. So maybe I'll finally use this LFO here as well and do what I did before. It's more subtle in here because, at the end of the day, it's more percussion sounds than kind of what it's doing on the synth, but it's still nice. So maybe what we'll do is we'll also map the scale. So I think you get the idea. I would probably carry on. I might make that sort of a patch that stays like this. I might record that into audio, all that kind of fun stuff, and then work with it in audio. But ladies and gents, that's Vector Map. As I said, hopefully you can see why I fell in love with the device. It's, free to us Ableton Live Suite users. It just gives you a whole new modulation option. LFOs and envelopes are great. Don't forget, like I've showed with the LFO here, sometimes modulating the modulator is amazing. So yes, welcome to Vector Map. And this is going to be a wrap at this point here for the video. So, if you've enjoyed this video, if you're enjoying the content on the channel, it helps the channel a lot to push those buttons, the ones I'm talking about. And just very quickly as well, this is a little bit of a window into, I'm just showing you a bit of a basic workflow here, but I do coach artists, DJs, performers and producers, and in those one-to-one sessions we go much deeper under the hood of Ableton Live and Max for Live and personalize all those details for your learning and your progress. So on that note, I'm going to sign out. I'm going to say thank you for watching. As I said, push those buttons, and I'm sure I will catch you all very soon in another tutorial. Keep on creating, everybody, and take care, and ciao for now. Bye.